Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're jumping into something absolutely awe-inspiring. We're going to map out exactly how microscopic, totally invisible electrochemical sparks inside our cells scale all the way up to command our entire physical body. Honestly, it's an incredibly fascinating system of control and coordination, and by the end of this, I promise you, you're going to see your own thoughts and movements in a completely different light. Let's get into it.
To understand why we even need this complex system in the first place, think about your body right now. If you're just sitting there watching this, your organs are in a nice, quiet state of balance, what we call homeostasis. But imagine you suddenly stand up and start doing jumping jacks. Instantly, your muscular activity spikes, right? That means your energy demand shoots up, which means your need for oxygen increases. To get that oxygen, your rate of respiration, your heartbeat, and your blood flow all have to surge, literally immediately. Your organs don't operate in a vacuum. They have to interact and complement each other. This immediate shift requires a blazingly fast communication network to coordinate your muscles, lungs, heart, and blood vessels in perfect, seamless synchrony.
So how exactly does the body manage this incredible balancing act? Well, here is our micro to macro roadmap for today. First, mastering human coordination. Second, the microscopic messenger, neurons. Third, the spark, nerve impulses. Fourth, crossing the synaptic gap. And finally, the ultimate command center.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, Mastering Human Coordination.
It all starts with a highly organized network. Our neural system provides point-to-point connections for incredibly quick coordination, and broadly speaking, it's divided into two main parts. First up, the central neural system, or CNS. This is your brain and your spinal cord. It's the primary site of information processing, basically the main computer processor of your body. Then we have the peripheral neural system, or PNS. This is all the nerves that hook up to the central system, essentially acting as the body's wiring. The PNS uses afferent fibers, think of them as arriving at the brain, to transmit sensory information from your tissues up to the CNS. And it uses efferent fibers, think exiting the brain, to send regulatory commands back down to those tissues. The PNS is then further split into the somatic neural system, which controls your voluntary skeletal muscles, and the autonomic neural system, which completely automatically manages your involuntary organs and smooth muscles. Moving right along to Section 2, the microscopic messenger, neurons.
So that was the macro architecture, but let's meet the foundational building blocks running through those wires. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the highly specialized shape of this microscopic structure, the neuron. A neuron is essentially a cell perfectly evolved to detect, receive, and transmit stimuli. You can see it's got three major parts. First, the cell body over on the left, which contains cytosol, typical organelles, and these specific granular bodies called Nissel's granules. Projecting out from that cell body are short, highly branched fibers called dendrites. These act like antennas, receiving impulses and bringing them toward the cell body. And finally, we have the long transmitting cable called the axon, which takes the signal away from the cell body toward its next destination.
But here's the thing. That long axon wire we just looked at isn't usually bare. In a lot of neurons, especially the ones in our spinal and cranial nerves, the axon is actually enveloped by specialized cells called Schwann cells. These guys wrap around the axon to form a thick, insulating layer known as the myelin sheath. But it's not one continuous tube. There are these tiny little gaps between the adjacent myelin sheaths, scientifically known as the nodes of Ranvier. This insulation is a downright brilliant evolutionary design feature because it helps protect the nerve fiber and drastically speeds up the transmission of the signal.
Which brings us to Section 3, the spark, nerve impulses. We've seen the hardware, but what is the actual software traveling down that wire?
Neurons are what we call excitable cells. But you might be wondering, why is the membrane of a resting neuron polarized in the first place? It essentially acts like a tiny battery just waiting to be discharged. And it's all thanks to a specific biological mechanism, the sodium-potassium pump. When a neuron is at rest, this pump is actively working, throwing 3 sodium ions outward for every 2 potassium ions it pulls into the cell. Because of this uneven exchange, and because the membrane is mostly blocked off to negatively charged proteins inside the cell, the fluid on the outside becomes positively charged, while the inner surface becomes negatively charged. This electrical potential difference across the resting membrane is called the resting potential. Basically, the spring is loaded.
Let's slow down for just a second to see exactly how this loaded spring releases. When a stimulus hits a specific site on that polarized membrane, everything changes in a fraction of a millisecond. The membrane suddenly opens the floodgates to those sodium ions waiting outside. We get a massive rapid influx of sodium rushing into the cell. Boom! This instantly reverses the polarity right at that spot. The inside becomes positive and the outside becomes negative. This reversal is called depolarization, and that sudden electrical shift is the action potential, or what we more commonly call a nerve impulse. The electrical current then flows to the very next section of the axon membrane, triggering the exact same thing there. Like a perfectly lined up row of dominoes falling, the impulse conducts rapidly down the entire length of the axon. And get this, these silent sparks can travel at speeds up to 268 miles per hour. Right behind that lightning-fast wave, potassium ions quickly diffuse outward to restore the original resting potential, literally resetting the dominoes so the fiber is ready for the very next signal.
All right, Section 4, Crossing the Synaptic Gap. The spark has successfully made it down the long axon, but eventually it hits the end of the line.
So, how does it cross the physical space to the next neuron? Well, nerve impulses jump from one neuron to another through junctions called synapses, and there are two main ways this happens. First, you have electrical synapses. In these, the membranes of the two neurons are so incredibly close together that the electrical current just flows directly from one cell into the next. It is extremely fast, but interestingly enough, it's pretty rare in the human system. The far more common method for us is the chemical synapse. Here, the pre- and postsynaptic neurons are actually separated by a fluid-filled physical gap called the synaptic cleft.
And this brilliantly illustrates how that physical gap is bridged. When the action potential arrives at the bulb-like terminal at the end of the axon, it stimulates these little spherical containers called synaptic vesicles. These vesicles rush to the membrane, fuse with it, and act like tiny chemical ferries, dumping their cargo, which are specialized chemicals called neurotransmitters, straight into the synaptic cleft. These neurotransmitters float right across the fluid and bind to very specific receptors on the membrane of the receiving neuron. This binding acts perfectly like a key in a lock, opening up ion channels in the new neuron, which then generates a brand new action potential. The spark has successfully crossed the river.
Finally, Section 5, the ultimate command center. Let's pan all the way out. Up to this point, we've looked at single sparks crossing a single microscopic gap. But what happens when you multiply that by billions, all firing simultaneously? This brings us to the central information processing organ of our entire body, the human brain. It acts as the absolute command and control system. And because it is so vital, it's heavily fortified. It sits fully protected inside the hard bone of the skull, and it's further wrapped in 3 layers of cranial meninges. You have the tough outer dura mater, a very thin middle arachnoid layer, and the inner pia mater, which clings directly to the brain tissue itself. Anatomically, this incredible organ is divided into 3 major parts: the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. Let's quickly look at what each one handles.
First up, the forebrain, which makes up the largest chunk of the human brain. The absolute most prominent feature here is the cerebrum, which is split right down the middle into left and right hemispheres. The outer layer of this is the cerebral cortex, famously known as the gray matter, because of the super dense concentration of neuron cell bodies. This is where your highest level processing happens, your memory, your communication, your complex thoughts. Now, the cerebrum wraps around a structure called the thalamus. Think of the thalamus as the major coordinating center for your sensory and motor signaling. Right at the base of that is the hypothalamus, an absolutely essential control center that regulates your body temperature and your basic primal urges for eating and drinking. And finally, the inner parts of the hemispheres form the limbic system. This network regulates your deepest emotional reactions, like excitement, fear, rage, and your inner motivation.
Moving slightly downward from there, we find the midbrain. It's relatively small, but absolutely vital, acting as an anatomical bridge located right between the thalamus of the forebrain and the pons of the hindbrain. A canal called the cerebral aqueduct passes straight through it, and its dorsal portion features 4 round swellings known as the corpora quadrigemina. Finally, wrapping up the anatomy, we reach the hindbrain, comprising 3 distinct structures. The pons consists of fiber tracts that interconnect different regions of the brain. Then there's the cerebellum. The crucial takeaway here is its highly convoluted, folded surface. It actually looks wrinkled specifically to provide a massive amount of additional surface area to pack in extra neurons that are strictly dedicated to integrating information and balancing the body. It's such an amazing evolutionary workaround. Lastly, the medulla, which connects directly down to the spinal cord. You don't have to consciously think about breathing or your heart beating, right? That's because the medulla contains the autonomic centers that flawlessly control your respiration, your cardiovascular reflexes, and even your gastric secretions behind the scenes.
So, what does this all mean for us? We've traveled from the sudden demand for oxygen during a workout down to the microscopic influx of sodium ions into a single nerve cell, all the way up to the billions of gray matter neurons firing in the cerebrum. And honestly, it leaves us with a truly profound question to consider. How incredible is it that absolutely every thought you form, every single memory you cherish, and every subtle movement you make relies entirely on these tiny, silent sparks traversing your biology every fraction of a second? The sheer scale and speed of human neural coordination is nothing short of a biological masterpiece. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer to uncover the mechanics behind our own minds. Until next time, keep learning and keep wondering.